Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to walk through what's actually changed in college admissions based on the most recent cycle, and more importantly, what those changes mean for students preparing for the next few years. This is not going to be a surface level overview. We're going to look at real data, real trends, and practical strategies that you can actually use. What does the current admissions landscape look like? Three things define the class of 2030 cycle. First, we're seeing a record number of applications. Second, acceptance rates remain historically low. And third, and this is the most important, strategy matters now more than ever. Students aren't just competing on strength anymore. They're competing on how clearly and strategically they present themselves. To understand what's happening now, we need to look at how we got here. Before 2020, admissions was relatively predictable and stable. Then from 2020 to about 2023, everything changed. COVID disrupted testing, schools went test optional, and application numbers surged. Now, from 2024 through today, we're no longer in chaos. We've settled into what we call the new normal. And that new normal works very differently from what families were used to even just 5 or 6 years ago. Here's the simplest way to understand the shift. For a long time, admissions was largely metrics driven, focusing primarily on GPA and test scores. Now, admissions is much more signal driven. Schools are looking at narrative, fit, and how clearly a student presents themselves. So the question is no longer just how strong is this student, it's also how clearly does this student make sense to us. Everything we're presenting tonight is based on real data. We're pulling from Common App reports, common data set disclosures, official school releases, and higher education publications. So when we talk about trends, these aren't guesses. They're grounded in what colleges themselves are reporting. Let's start with the biggest driver of change in admissions today, the application explosion. What you're looking at here is total application volume over time, and the key takeaway is simple. Applications have been rising steadily for years, and they're now at an all-time high. We're approaching nearly 10 million applications submitted through the Common App alone. That is not a small increase. That's a structural shift in how students apply to college. But it's not just that there are more applications, there's also more students applying. So the pool itself is larger, not just more active. And that means more competition at every level. This slide breaks down what's really happening. Over the last decade, applications submitted have more than doubled. The number of students applying has increased by 58%. And importantly, students are applying to more schools each. So each individual student is creating more competition for everyone else. And that's what's driving the new reality of increased selectivity. And this leads directly to a really important consequence. More applications combined with a limited time means admissions officers are doing faster first reads. They simply do not have the capacity to deeply evaluate every application from the start, so initial impressions matter more than they used to. What this means in practice is that admissions officers are using more triage-based review processes. They're quickly identifying which applications move forward to deeper evaluation and which ones don't. Not every application is read with the same level of depth, and that makes clarity and positioning much more important than it used to be. So what does this mean for students? Your goal is to make yourself immediately competitive. That starts with academics, a strong GPA, rigorous coursework, and solid test scores. But equally important is culture and fit, having clear, cohesive interests and presenting an authentic, engaging voice. Because in a fast read environment, your application needs to make sense quickly. Now that we understand what's driving application growth, let's talk about what it means for outcomes. With more students applying to more schools, acceptance rates have not improved. At many selective schools, they remain at or near historic lows because while the number of applicants has increased, the number of available spots has not. That gap is what makes admissions feel so competitive right now. This is one of the most important shifts for families to understand. Schools that might have been considered targets for strong students, like Northeastern, NYU, or University of Virginia, have become significantly more selective over time. So the categories families are using, reach, target, safety, often need to be recalibrated. A school that might have been realistic 5 years ago may not be realistic today without a really strong strategy in place. So, how do you respond to that? The first step is building a balanced college list. Every student should have a mix of reach, target, and safety schools, and at least two true safeties. And just as important, every school on the list should be somewhere the student would actually be happy to attend. Let's define what a safety school actually is. A safety is not a lesser school. It's a school where your academic profile is above the average admitted student and the overall admit rate is relatively high. This is about probability, not quality. These are examples of strong schools that can function as safeties for well qualified students. And I want to give you a quick reason why each of these is actually a really great option and not just a fallback. Penn State University Park has one of the largest and most powerful alumni networks in the country, which can be a huge advantage for internships and job placement. Rutgers, New Brunswick is located right between New York City and Philadelphia, which gives students access to incredible internship and career opportunities. The University of Maryland College Park is especially strong in areas like computer science, engineering, and business, with top ranked programs and strong employer pipelines. And Arizona State offers one of the most well regarded honors colleges in the country, which gives students a much smaller, more personalized academic experience within a large university. These are just a few examples of truly great schools that just happen to be less selective. Remember, the goal isn't just to have a safety, it's to have a great safety. This ties into another important mindset shift. Students often focus too much on rankings and prestige, but admissions officers consistently emphasize fit. As Georgia Tech's admissions director puts it, if you're applying just because of rankings, you're doing it wrong. And Yale's former dean of admissions makes the same point. Strong applicants explain why a school is a good match, not just why it's prestigious. So alignment matters more than brand name. Let's shift to another major change in admissions: testing. For several years, test optional policies led to fewer students submitting scores, but that trend has now reversed. Today, more students are submitting test scores again than those who are not, which tells us something important. Even when testing is optional, many applicants still feel it's beneficial to include scores. And at the most selective schools, we're seeing a clear shift back towards requiring test scores. As of this year, nearly half of the top 20 ranked schools require testing. And among the schools that don't require testing, many have verbiage in their testing policies that still encourage students to submit scores. The testing landscape is changing and quickly. There are a few key reasons behind this shift. First, most competitive applicants were already submitting scores. Second, testing provides a standardized way to compare students from different schools and backgrounds, which is especially important given concerns around grade inflation. And third, studies have shown that test scores accurately predict academic success. So, from the college's perspective, testing adds useful information and reduces uncertainty. So, what does this mean for students? First, test early, ideally starting in the spring of junior year so that you have multiple test dates to finalize your scores in time for early application deadlines. Second, aim for strong scores. At the most selective schools, that often means a 1500 or higher on the SAT. And keep in mind that a goal like this typically requires long term test prep, not just a few weeks. And third, don't rely on test optional policies. Policies change, and good scores help even at test optional schools. Now we're going to talk about what may be the most important structural shift in college admissions today. Regular decision is no longer the default. This chart shows how much of each class is filled through early application rounds. The red represents the portion of the incoming class that was admitted early, and the yellow is the portion of the class admitted through regular decision. And the key takeaway is this. At many top schools, around half or even more of the class is filled before regular decision applications are even reviewed. That means by the time regular decision starts, a significant portion of the available seats are already gone. Let's look at a concrete example. At MIT, about 54.5% of the class is filled through early action, and you can see the difference in admission rates. Early action, around 6%. Regular decision, around 3.5%. So even at a school with a non-binding early program, applying early gives you a meaningful advantage. The advantage is even greater at schools that have a binding early decision program. This is one of the clearest examples of how early strategy can impact outcomes. So why is it so much harder to get in during regular decision? Three reasons. First, there are fewer spots remaining. Second, there are more applicants because most students are still applying in regular decision. And third, the pool is stronger because many deferred early applicants are added back into the regular decision pool. So you're not just competing for fewer spots, you're competing against a more competitive group of students. So if early applications matter this much, students need a strategy. That starts with building your college list early, identifying top choice schools, researching each school's early policies, and then deciding where and when to apply. This isn't something you figure out in October. It needs to be planned in advance. Not all early applications are the same, so it's important to understand the differences. Early action is non-binding. You can apply to multiple schools and keep your options open. You are not obligated to enroll if you're admitted. Restrictive early action is also non-binding, but it limits where else you can apply early. And early decision is binding. If you are admitted, you are expected to enroll. So each option has different strategic implications. Early decision in particular can be a powerful tool, but only in the right situation. It makes sense to apply through early decision if the school is truly your top choice and you cannot imagine being happier somewhere else. And you're confident about affordability and your application is 100% ready to submit. If those conditions aren't met, early decision might not be the right strategy. But when they are, early decision can significantly improve your chances of admission. Now that we've talked about when to apply, let's talk about what actually makes an application stand out. And this starts with activities, because one of the biggest mistakes students make is treating activities like a checklist. But in today's admissions landscape, activities need a point. This is one of the most important ideas in modern admissions. Depth matters more than breadth. Admissions officers consistently say that a few long-term meaningful activities will stand out more than a long list of short-lived ones. So this isn't about doing more, it's about doing things with purpose, consistency, and commitment. This quote from Penn captures it really well. The activities section shows how you spend your time and energy, two of your most limited resources. In other words, activities reveal what you care about, what you prioritize, and how you follow through on your interests. That's why they matter so much. This is another really important shift. There are no right activities. MIT puts it very clearly. You should choose activities because they interest and challenge you, not because you think they'll look impressive on your application. Admissions officers are very good at spotting when something is done just to check a box. So authenticity matters more than perceived prestige here. So what should students actually focus on? Three things. Focus on just two or three core areas. Build toward leadership roles and show measurable impact. That last one is important because it's not just about participation, it's about what you've actually accomplished. This is how that progression typically looks over time. In ninth grade, students should explore, try different things, figure out what they enjoy. In 10th and 11th grade, the focus shifts to commitment, narrowing things down and going deeper in just a couple of areas. And by 11th and 12th grade, students should be taking on leadership roles and creating impact within their activities. That progression tells a story, and that's what admissions officers are looking for. We've talked about academic strategy and activities. Now we get to the part of the application that's the most personal and often the most misunderstood, the essay. Because if activities show what you do, your essay shows who you are. This quote says it very directly. A strong essay can elevate an average application, and a weak essay can hurt a strong one. And the reason essays matter so much today is because of everything we've already discussed. With more applications than ever and so many students looking similar on paper, essays often become the deciding factor between otherwise similar applicants. So, what are admissions officers actually looking for? This quote from Emory is one of the clearest answers. They're not looking for perfection. They're looking for authenticity, reflection, and a genuine voice. And this is important. The most memorable essays are not the ones that try to sound impressive. They're the ones that sound real. Here's the challenge. It has always been difficult to stand out in essays. There are common patterns we see again and again, like the sports injury leading to resilience, the volunteering experience that changes perspective, the failure that leads to growth. These are meaningful experiences, but the structure and framing often end up sounding very similar. So even when students are writing about real experiences, the essays can start to kind of blend together. That challenge has only been made worse by AI tools. As more students rely on AI tools or heavily edited drafts, essays are becoming more polished, but also more uniform, and colleges are noticing this. As Duke's Dean of Admissions put it, they're no longer assuming that an essay fully reflects a student's own writing. So the bar has shifted. It's no longer enough to write a technically strong essay. Good writing is expected. It's like salt in a dish. You notice when it's missing, but it's not what makes the dish memorable. So how do you stand out in this environment? A few key strategies. First, keep a journal to capture real experiences and reflections. Keeping a journal will allow you to be able to better brainstorm ideas when it's time to start the writing process. Next, start early. This process takes time. Spend serious time brainstorming before you ever start writing. Revise multiple times, and importantly, avoid using AI to draft your essay, because the more your essay sounds like everyone else's, the less it helps you stand out. What admissions officers are really looking for is clarity of thought and authenticity, not just polished writing. So now let's make this concrete. We're going to look at two responses to the same essay prompt from Stanford. This is a real prompt that students might see. Write a note to your future roommate that helps them and the admissions office get to know you better. As you're listening, I want you to think about one question. Which essay would you actually remember? We'll start with this first example. I'll read it aloud. Hey, future roommate. Moving in with someone new always feels like a mix of excitement and uncertainty. So I figured I'd start with a quick snapshot of what living with me might actually be like. I'm pretty easygoing when it comes to shared space. Whether you're someone who needs total quiet to focus or someone who likes a bit of background noise, I'm flexible and willing to figure out a setup that makes our room comfortable for both of us. One thing you'll notice pretty quickly is that I almost always have music playing. It's kind of the background track to everything I do, studying, getting ready in the morning, or just unwinding after a long day. My taste is all over the place. Indie rock, old school hip hop, random instrumentals I stumble across late at night. I like finding songs that match a mood or completely change it. If you ever hear something you don't, if you ever hear something you like or hate, let me know. I am always up for swapping recommendations. And don't worry, I won't blast music without checking first. At first glance, this is a perfectly fine essay. It's clear, it's polished, it's well organized, there are no obvious mistakes. But when you listen to what it's actually doing, it talks about being easygoing, it mentions flexibility, it describes music preferences in an extremely generic way. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's also nothing particularly specific, surprising, or memorable. You could swap out the name at the bottom of this essay and it could belong to just about any student. And that's the issue. This is what a lot of essays look like today: technically strong, broadly relatable, but ultimately interchangeable. This is what we mean when we say essays are starting to sound generic. Now let's look at a second example. Dear future roommate, I believe people are defined by their quirks. Sure, you may be a charismatic individual who loves volunteering and majors in behavioral studies, but what side of the bed do you sleep on? Do you put milk or cereal in first? How do you eat Kit Kats? I believe these small, seemingly insignificant questions are particularly revealing. By the way, there's a correct answer to all of these questions. So, seeing as you will be my partner in crime for our first year at Stanford, it's necessary I share my own peculiarities. Firstly, I'm a lo-fi fanatic. I have comprehensive playlists catered to every mood imaginable, from Tuesday mornings after the gym to eating caramel flavored ice cream at 1 a.m. So if you ever need some music to help you relax, do not fret. This essay does something very different. It starts with a unique idea being defined by small quirks, and then it uses very specific concrete details, asking a series of rhetorical questions and adding a lot of humor that makes the writer feel real. It creates personality and gives you something to picture. And it builds from there, introducing music preferences in a way that feels natural and personal instead of just generic. This is the key difference. This essay doesn't just tell you the student is interesting, it shows you. And because of that, it's much more memorable. Now, spoiler alert, this version of the essay, pardon me, was written by a student who got into Stanford. The previous version of the essay was written by AI. We've covered a lot of ground. More applications, lower admit rates, changing testing policies, the importance of early strategy, and how activities and essays are evaluated. So the question is, what should you actually be doing? First, make yourself immediately competitive. That means strong grades in challenging courses, solid test scores, clear focused interests, and an authentic voice. Because in today's admissions process, clarity matters. Your application needs to make sense quickly. Second, be prepared to navigate a more competitive process. That means focusing on fit over prestige, building a balanced college list, and including at least two strong safety schools. This is about being realistic and strategic at the same time. Third, adapt to the changing role of testing. Give yourself enough time to prepare. Finalize scores early and don't rely on test optional policies as a strategy. Strong scores are still one of the clearest signals that you can provide. Fourth, have a clear early application strategy. Build your college list early. Research each school carefully and identify your top choices. Make intentional decisions about where you will apply early, because when you apply is now just as important as where you apply. Fifth, make your activities count. Focus on a few areas rather than spreading yourself too thin. Choose things that you genuinely enjoy. Look for leadership opportunities and aim to create measurable impact. This is about depth and direction, not volume. And finally, create essays that feel authentic and engaging. Keep a journal so you have real experiences to draw from. Start early because this process takes time. And most importantly, write something that actually sounds like you. Avoid relying on AI to draft your essays because in a world where many essays sound similar, your voice is what sets you apart.